right. Well then, if you could start the recording, that would be great, Matt.
We are recording. So welcome everyone. Oh wait, what is happening? There we go. We don't have to do welcoming because y'all are here. Welcome to Conversations on Access. Captioning has been provided for this event. So you can enable that by the button at the bottom that says Show Captions CC. We also have sign language interpretation today for better accessibility. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Heather Hill, and I am a white woman with long purple hair, and I wear glasses. I'm a settler immigrant here on the land we currently call Canada, and I'm talking to you today from my home near Western University in London, Ontario, which is situated on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenapehoik, and the Chinantan nations, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. On this land is the Thames River, though I think the Anishinaabe name of the Deshkan-Zibi, or Antler River, is a much more descriptive name, as the river has many paths through the city. For the Oneida of the Thames, the Deshkan-Zibi is a source of drinking water, but it's unsafe. The community has been under a boil order since 2019, and they are not the only Indigenous community that lacks clean water. There are water protectors like Autumn Peltier, an 18-year-old from the Wikwemikong First Nations. She has been a water protector since she was 13 years old, and her efforts to talk about water and the importance of water. It is on settlers to learn from Indigenous communities and nations how to be a part of our world in a way that is less extractive, in a way that shows respect, relationship, and reciprocity so that all communities can have water. In the words of a friend, thank you for hearing my words. Sarah?
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here with you. My name is Sarah Smith. I am a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair and wearing a dark blue dress today. This event is the second in a series titled Conversations on Access. And today we're focusing our discussion on disability activism and impairment theory. Our first conversation in the series actually took place this past spring in 2023, featuring Valissa Thompson and Dr. Sammy Schock. And I'm going to share a link of the recording of that event in the chat in case you missed it, because we'd really like to ensure everybody has a chance to engage with it. Conversations on Access is a series that came together here at the Faculty of Information and Media Studies and is organized by Heather Hill, Joanne Escobar-Lamana, and myself. And the intention of this series is to focus on access as a tangible, lived experience, going beyond an approach of access solely as a topic of research. This focus is emphasized through a selection of speakers who include artists, activists, practitioners, and scholars. Each of the conversations aims to initiate a broad discussion that engages the public, as well as faculty and university community here at Western. These events employ the format of a conversation to allow for and encourage connections, critical reflections, and discussion that supports care and the building of community, and one that aims to inform our approach and our actions here in London and at Western University. And before we get started, we would like to acknowledge several supporters of this event, people who have made this possible. So we'd like to acknowledge the support for this event from the Faculty of Information and Media Studies here at Western University, as well as support from the Canada Research Chairs Program. And I'd also like to extend specific thanks to FIMS Dean Lisa Henderson for her support of this series, to Matt Ward for his help organizing the Zoom webinar and registration, and to Becky Blue for her work on the communication and promotion of this event. And now I'd like to turn it over to Juan to introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Sarah. So my name is Juan. I'm a white man with short brown hair and a mustache. And today we are thrilled to introduce our two panelists. Joining us are Ashton Forrest and Jonathan Sterne. Ashton Forrest is a master's candidate in the Department of Philosophy at Western University. Her areas of scholarly focus are justice, human rights, and as they pertain to moral, legal, and political philosophy. And as a person with a debilitating chronic condition called scleroderma, she has spent 2 decades advocating for and raising awareness about accessibility and disability issues on the local, provincial, and national stage. She has served on the City of London's Accessibility Advisory Committee, Cheshire London's Cultural Competency Committee, and was the former student accessibility consultant with the Academic Support and Engagement Office at Western. As a former member of the Post-Secondary Education Standards Committee for the Accessibility of Ontarians with Disability Act, she worked with other accessibility experts and advocates to create an accessible education standard for the AODA. And whether in her former role as the Society of Graduate Students' Accessibility Commissioner, or just as a member of the Western community, Ashton works with the accessibility groups, both on and off campus, to raise awareness about disability, accessibility issues, and advocate for change within student groups and the university. And this past summer, Ashton co-organized the NEEDS, National Educational Association of Disabled Students, State of the Schools Tour London stop. It was an opportunity for the community to raise awareness about the barriers to education, the impacts on mental health, and co-create solutions. And Ashton also worked as a training facilitator and developer for Courtree, which is an online disability education, training, and mediation services that values co-creating and co-facilitating its content with people with lived experience. She currently works as a consultant on a scleroderma application aimed to improve education and supports for patients living with scleroderma. And Ashton's main goal is to ensure the voices of people with disabilities are reflected in policy, programming, and the built environment throughout society, especially in the healthcare and education sectors. She lives by the phrase, "nothing about us without us," for the impact Ashton has had on the London community and beyond. She made the Mayor's New Year's Honor List 2023 in the accessibility category. So Ashton, thanks for being here. We're thrilled to have you. And our other speaker, Jonathan Sterne. Jonathan Sterne's work is concerned with the cultural dimension of communication technologies, especially their form and role in large-scale societies. One of his major ongoing projects has involved developing the history and theory of sound in the modern West. Beyond the work on sound and music, he's published dozens of articles and book chapters that cover a wide range of topics in media theory and historiography, disability studies, science and technology studies, new media, and cultural studies. And he's also written on the politics of academic labor. As a researcher, he employs historiographic, philosophical, and interpretive methods, long-form interviews, and ethnographic participant observation. And in addition to his books and articles, Sterne has published online since 1994, experimenting with multimodal and open access approaches, which are now gathered under the digital humanities umbrella. Sterne has had fellowships from the Mellon and Woodrow Wilson Foundations, the Smithsonian Institution, and at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University, and also the University of Southern California, and the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. He has been a visiting scholar at Harvard and New York universities, and a visiting researcher in the Social Media Collective at Microsoft Research New England and at Microsoft Research New York. His work has also been supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, the Fonds québécois de recherche sur la société et la culture, the Beaverbrook Foundation, the Annenberg Foundation, and the Australian Research Council. And in addition, he's delivered over 100 invited lectures and keynotes around the world and has been widely translated. And in 2016, he won the McGill Principals Prize for Excellence in Teaching at the full professor level. And in the chat, we posted a link and you can learn more about Jonathan's work there. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Heather for the aim of the conversation.
Thanks, Joanne. Today's conversation addresses impairment theory and disability activism, seeking to bring together approaches to disability along with lived experience and direct action. Our conversation will address impairment and disability as frameworks, consider accessibility in the academy, and also include discussion of care work and fatigue. So our format today is structured to feature the experiences and ideas of our speakers, Ashton and Jonathan. We have prepared some questions for them to respond to, and we will also hold space for audience engagement. We will be adding comments and information periodically in the chat, and you are also welcome to comment in the chat at any time. If you have questions for our speakers or that you were hoping that they would specifically address, we welcome you to enter those into the Q&A, which is also along that bar at the bottom. And we'll get to those closer to 1 p.m. So let us begin. My first question is actually for Ashton. Ashton, you are well known in London and Western University, so good to see you, as an advocate for awareness about accessibility and advocacy around disability issues. This is work that has taken place across the city at the municipal level, institutionally here at Western, as well as on the provincial and national stage. Can you tell us about your approach to disability activism? How do you understand and approach accessibility?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so glad to be here. I just want to start by saying that I am a Black woman with shoulder-length Black hair. I am wearing Black glasses, and I also am wearing these triangular golden earrings and a geometric shirt that's white, beige, brown, and all these other neutral colors. My approach to disability activism, I'm sorry, I'm tripping over myself, is about community-based, reaching out to people directly, bringing people together. Oftentimes people think, oh, Ashton's an accessibility advocate. She's going to fix things, and I can't do it alone. There's just too much work out there. I am tired, and there's so many different systems that my activism interacts with, whether it's healthcare policy, educational policy, transportation, being able to engage in the social environments of our community, housing, accessible housing. There's so much there. So it's impossible for one person to do it. So I really encourage other students when they do reach out to me to find their voice and start speaking for themselves. I usually ask them to, I give them resources, I connect them to other people. I even connect them to the media so their voices are amplified. Because what I find often when I bring up things, since I'm so vocal, is that, Ashton, you're the only one speaking about this. Nobody else is facing these problems. And I'm like, I have a whole crew, community that is saying the exact same thing. But again, there's also fair repercussion. So doing that advocacy work in a way that we can say, we don't need to be afraid, but if we are afraid, we do have supports and resources. So that's my approach to advocacy.
This idea of building community is just so vital, right? Because so many people are afraid to speak up or don't have the energy to speak up in the space. Jonathan, is there anything that you want to add on to these ideas that Ashton was sharing?
Well, first, hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan. I am, judging by the lighting, a very white-looking person right now, a balding, middle-aged man with brownish collared shirt, bluish glasses, and above my right shoulder is a giant stuffed unicorn named Mr. Twinkles the Destroyer, the COVID unicorn being ridden by an ecstatic Kermit the Frog. So I'm very glad to be joining you from so-called Montreal, also known as Jojage. Of course, not only do I think Ashton's approach makes sense, I feel like it's the only approach. I mean, I'm usually like let 1,000 flowers bloom, but I think that one of the problems, and this isn't unique to disability activism, is that the people who speak up then suddenly become the people who are responsible for fixing things. And that part of our work is to make it possible so that other people feel like they have some agency and some possibility of affecting change, and that what they have to say matters. Because I mean, it's a chronic, if I may use this word, it's a chronic problem with activism, right? That the burden of change falls on the shoulders of a small number of people. And so really, I think this is one of the challenges for disability activism and also disability theory, is thinking through collectivity and what that can look like in conditions where it's not so simple to say, like, I'm committed, so I'll show up to the meeting. Like, that's a much more complicated proposition for sick and disabled people.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Juan, do you want to pick up the next question?
Yeah. So the next question is for Jonathan, but also, again, Ashton, if you have any thoughts on it, please. Jonathan, so in your 2021 book, Diminished Faculties, it advances a political phenomenology of impairment through a highly personal and reflective text that sees you delve into chronic illness, fatigue, voice, and odd scarifications, amongst many other topics. And the book posits impairment as a productive term, and even an opportunity for us to reflect on the pervasiveness and inevitability, and at times desirability, of impairment. And so could you tell us about the relationship between disability impairment, or put another way, what does understanding our experiences in terms of impairment offer us?
All right, thanks for that question. I mean, I feel like the answer is the whole book, but I'll give it a shot. Okay, so the first thing is that in disability theory, and I mean very specifically academic writing about disability, and I guess it's also important when we're also talking about activism to not say the academics or the intellectuals and the activists or the practitioners. I don't actually believe that. I think that there are intellectuals all over our social world, and that different forms of intellectual production serve different purposes. But I'm talking to a philosopher, so I think you probably agree with me, I hope. Okay, so disability and impairment, first of all, and I'm really talking about the history of disability theory in Anglophone writing too, because these words mean different things, like if you're writing in German or Hindi or something. In Anglophone, what's happened in Anglophone disability writing is, as the social model of disability has gained traction, and then the models that came after it, political relational model of disability, and other complex embodiment, and all the other models that sort of followed from the triumph of the social model. Do I need to explain what that is? I mean, I sort of feel like we're at a disability studies thing, so yeah, no?
Maybe just a quick explanation.
Oh, yeah.
Like
all right, so the medical model of disability is the idea that disability is a defect, basically, in the person that needs to be repaired through medical means. It's highly individualized, and it's something completely undesirable, right? So it's to be avoided. It is exceptional rather than normal, and no one would want to be disabled. No one would want to identify as disabled, and instead we should do everything we can to become as non-disabled as possible at all times. That's sort of the version of the medical model that I currently would describe as existing, which isn't to say everybody in medicine subscribes to that model today. There are plenty of disability-informed medical practitioners and scholars now, though not enough. So that was the medical model. The social model was promoted first by a group of activists in the UK, I'm forgetting the exact name, the Union or the League of Handicapped, something. You can look it up online. But they basically said disability is socially produced, which is to say it is produced by environments or social relationships, which are themselves disabling. And then scholars have refined this because social model doesn't account for something like the reality of pain or fatigue. But that doesn't mean people want to go back to the medical model, which is, of course, tied to the authority of technoscience and Western medicine, and also often very stigmatizing and individualizing. So today, when we think about disability, we think about it as sort of polymorphously constructed, an amalgamation of real bodily conditions, social relations, and social spaces, right? So if we're in an environment where we read by listening, for instance, let's say you're listening to an audiobook, dyslexia isn't really functionally a disability in that moment, right? It's just a reading. It's a difference with, it's a print disability. So if you're not operating in the domain of print, it effectively doesn't exist. In an environment where there are ramps everywhere, the difference between people who walk and who roll becomes less important. It's still there, it's still real, it still exists, but it's less important if the ramps aren't at too steep of an angle, which is a problem in Quebec, but maybe we'll talk about that later. Okay, so that's all a long preface of like the world of disability theory I encountered. What struck me in reading that work was they often said, well, impairment is this real thing. And they just transferred all this language that was in the medical model of disability onto impairment, right? Impairment is a defect. Impairment is a lack. Impairment is like the reality of the pain or the fatigue. But disability is the socially constructed thing. And we know from reading scholars on race, sexuality, and gender identity that this binary between real and constructed has really been taken apart for the last, I don't know, 50 years, longer maybe, right? I mean, you could read Fanon on epidermalization, you could read Judith Butler on the sex-gender binary, like there's a long history here. So I was interested in what happens if we take impairment as itself relational, constructed, contingent, rather than this sort of ground truth from which disability flows. And second of all, I wanted to think with it pretty seriously. And one of the contradictions of contemporary disability theory, and I understand why this contradiction exists, is that on one hand, it's a very, like, we're in a very affirmative and self-assertive moment about experience and disabled experience and the authority of experience. At the same time, disability theory, if you think about it from a more hermeneutic standpoint and interpretive standpoint, like the first and most fundamental insight is that your experiences can't possibly be transparent to yourself. And so as a relatively privileged disabled person, I felt like I was the perfect subject to perform this little experiment on of what happens if we do the disclosing of experience, we do the memoirization that is so of the moment in disability writing, but we undermine it at the same time. And so it's like an authorial voice that's constantly tripping over itself, although it changes chapter by chapter. But that's why I was interested in impairment. And it's not like we should all talk about impairment instead of disability now. It's just another way into the problem that I like Alison Kafer's line about how the majority of people affected by disability theory probably wouldn't themselves identify as disabled. And so it's another way into that problem. It's meant to be a tool in the kit, not a replacement for all the other terms. And certainly in my own like political and organizing work, I still use disabled because that's the institutional term. And I think like, I don't want to try to have a philosophical argument when I'm trying to like advocate for accessibility or access needs or things like that for myself or for other people. That was long, sorry.
Oh, but it was beautiful, long and beautiful.
Thank
There's
you.
a lot of points that I agree on. I do think that there's this way of giving more, like everybody, like you said, everybody's an intellectual, whether you're practicing as an advocate or if you're in the academy. And I find that there is like, I have so many lived experiences that are true. I've heard lots of lived experiences, but for some reason it's not considered knowledge, and it's often, downgraded unless, someone with a PhD and is teaching says it, then it matters. Or somebody who's working in that field, it matters. But as an activist, I'm often asked to do free labor and, look at things, but then it doesn't matter because I'm an activist, not the professional. So I completely agree that there needs to be a conversation that we all have this different types of knowledge that are very important to the conversation of disability theory, studies, and activism. You said a lot, and I think the impairment and disability discussion is very philosophical. And I think with activism, it becomes, some people get so wrapped up into it. So some people might be, deaf or part of the deaf community, but don't consider themselves disabled because they think of it as a cultural experience and they don't think anything's wrong with it. Like I have a friend who's Indigenous and made it clear to me that they do not identify as disabled, that they're part of a special linguistic community. And her family does a lot of activism on, reunited the Oneida sign language stuff. And then there are people who are would identify as mad or having mental health concerns, but again, they don't see themselves as disabled, or people who are neurodivergent who think differently and have different ways of processing, but it's not a disability per se. It's the way society has been built up to see their ways of thinking and processing information as something that is a defect when it's not. It's a different way of thinking. And when it comes to activism, people who are enabled or able-bodied sometimes don't feel like they can contribute to accessibility advocacy or disability human rights advocacy because they don't feel like they're part of the movement. Yeah, we do need people, allies, and people that might not recognize that according to the structures and the definitions out there, they might fall into one or the other category of being disabled or having an impairment. And I think we need to start having conversations that disability advocacy is not just about disabled people, it's about everyone, because we're all affected about it at one point or another.
Can I ask you a question, Ashton?
Sure.
Is that allowed? Is that
of course it is.
Yeah, okay. So something I've been thinking about is like, what do you do with neurodiversity or the idea of deafness as linguistic diversity? How do you talk about that affirmatively and still talk about the fact that deaf rights, mad rights, autistic rights do share a lot of the same sort of structural political necessities of what we would call more traditional disability rights. One way I think about it is like whether or not you identify as disabled, you may be affected by ableism, right? And that's so like anti-ableism is a framework, although I worry that that also still might not be satisfactory for, like a neurodiversity framework or something. So I'm just curious if you've, like, just following from what you just said, how you think about that and how you think about common cause, because disability is such a big and baggy category. Like people really, the range of identifications that get you into that, under that umbrella is like quite staggering.
It's a tough one because I'm even having conversations with people about using the word ableism. They think that it's not plain language. But like the word racism, everybody understands it. Homophobia, everybody understands it. So I think we need to normalize that the term ableism is part of plain language now, and maybe have like clear definitions of it. But I think the community needs to grapple with it the same way. And in terms of how to have that conversation about disability with this broad umbrella, but then also people not identifying with that umbrella, it's a tough one because we can talk about, equality or human thriving, and that the human body comes in so many different forms and whatnot, but then it kind of gets so broad that disability gets lost in that. So it's something I'm still challenged with, because sometimes when I'm advocating on behalf of students or encouraging them to advocate on themselves, like some of them don't want to apply for the Ontario Disability Support Program because they don't feel like that they have a disability. They feel like they can overcome something and they don't need that support, or they don't want to register for accessible education services because, again, they don't want to be labeled, or even international students, the fear of being labeled as someone with a disability or some sort of impairment will affect their ability to immigrate or other transportation things. So it's a difficult conversation to have, but like, I guess in the context of where you're advocating, the scope might be broader and then or smaller about whether you use disability or equality or NAD or neurodivergency. I think about it's all about context.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because one of the things we were discussing as a team before this event happened was thinking about voice, and it kind of picks up on a lot of what's been said so far. So, of course, like Ashton, you talk a lot about, giving voice to lived experience in the academy, which is a space in which a lot of discussions around accessibility and disability are certainly not fully ever often transparent or sometimes marginalized. I think we might agree. And Jonathan, of course, your book is grappling with voice in many different ways, kind of grappling in terms of the authorial voice, grappling in terms of like your lived experience in terms of dealing with cancer and vocal cord paralysis. So I wanted to ask a question just about disclosing personal histories is such a complicated contextual process. And Ashton, you're just talking about context being key. So a question for you both is, what does it mean to voice your lived experience within the academy specifically? Maybe we can pull our conversation over to the university context here. And whoever wants to jump in first can do that. It's just an open question.
Wait, are you nodding like I should go, or are you nodding like I want to go? Okay. Well, I mean, it's positional, right? Like I'm a tenured full professor, right? So I think it serves several purposes, right? Like, so on one level, it's the politics of coming out, and it shares that with lots of other things. So I stand up in my intro to communications studies class in front of 200 undergraduates at the beginning of the semester, and I say, like, I am disabled. I have a suite of disabilities. I don't go into a lot of details there. I'm just like, they're like potato chips. You can't eat only one. And so that if students have access needs, I just tell them, like, you can go through what is now unfortunately been renamed as the Student Office of Accessibility and Achievement. At McGill, you can go through all those bureaucratic processes to get accommodations in my class, or you can just come to me and tell me what your access needs are and we can work it out. Like, and that if you have questions about being a disabled student at university, obviously I'm not a student, but I'm happy to be a resource, right? So there, I think it's, in my case, it's kind of a political duty, right? Like I have the institutional security and privilege that making myself legible as a disabled person in a position of authority, especially where my disabilities are largely invisible and audible, like, you might see it. I remember one day I was walking off campus out of work, and my partner is meeting me at the gates, and she looks at me and she's like, "Wow, you look like shit today," which was not, it was said lovingly, but it was because I was so fatigued. I was just dragging myself down the right. So it is visible sometimes, but not really. I have a knee injury right now, so I'm walking around with a cane. So I'm like, experimenting with the experience of being visibly rather than invisibly disabled, although this will probably be a temporary thing, which is, I mean, that's a whole other issue. But so I think like being legible when you have institutional authority is really important. I think the testimony like I've given of my experience has mostly been useful for other people to feel like they can do the same thing, which is often not my experience. It's a related experience or something. And it's also led me to make decisions about, doing activist stuff on campus here that I'm like, I'm not sure this is going to work, but I sort of have a responsibility to be present in those spaces and part of those processes, even if they don't turn out the way I want them to. So yeah, I mean, I think there's always a risk to it. And I mean, I could get into some of that, though. In my case, it's really first world problems, like compared to other people. And I'm not an oppression Olympics guy, but I also feel like that's not the purpose of an event like this. But I will say there have been some like very minor professional costs to being an out disabled person, even at my like advanced career stage and relative level of comfort in the profession. And I can see why it's much scarier for a graduate student or an undergraduate or somebody who's like a contingent scholar or trying to immigrate somewhere to come out. Especially immigration stuff is like just, I mean, it's the guidelines are like literally ableist, like it's a script for ableism. We want these kinds of people, not these kinds of people. I'll stop there. Ashton, over to you.
Yeah, voice is an interesting conversation because when I think about it, there's so many dimensions. I forgot who mentioned it, but being featured in the Western Gazette article about a deep dive into accessibility at Western, that amplified a lot of voices and brought a lot of attention to many of the issues that students at Western are facing. And it got a lot of recognition across Canada. I saw people commenting about that article. And even just me being on my scooter, because that's how people identify me. They see my scooter first before they see me. They'll be like, "Are you that chick?" And I'm like, "Which chick?" And they'll be like, "The Gazette article." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I was in the article." And they will say, "Great work. We need more people talking about this. We need people to doing this. This is the most serious and great article that the Gazette has put out." And I think those kind of articles amplify the voices that tend to not get, noticed or shut down or repeatedly pushed around. Social media is very effective when it comes to amplifying voices. I think I got a lot of attention on Twitter because I would usually call up the university. It's like, today's the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Why hasn't anybody said anything? And all of a sudden something comes out. Getting people together through social media too, and through that voice, make connections to people I've never met and still haven't met, and are able to like work together in community spaces, whether it's virtual or across the country. Voice is interesting in another sense of, I feel like I have a very squeaky voice, like a small voice. And like, even when I hear myself speak after being angry, I don't sound threatening at all. So I don't think people take me very seriously when it comes to my voice, and it makes me feel small. And that's how I feel like I'm being gaslit. I have so much knowledge, so much to offer, so much experiences, and yet I'm still not taken seriously when I'm at the table. So even like when I was an employee at Western, sitting at the table, I felt like a token, where it was just like, you're the disabled Black woman, and we're happy to have you there so we can use you as a poster child, but we're not able to accommodate you to do that work or even to be a student. So it feels like we have tokenized voices. And then because I'm so outspoken, and I also encourage other students to get in touch with the media and be outspoken, I also feel like I'm being shunned from many conversations that are happening on campus. Or I feel like, why bring my voice to the table when we're having these we're talking about voices about the conversation? Are those listening? Are those ears that are willing to listen, or people just nodding along to be polite? And I find that for my own sanity and to protect my energy and my health, I now just search for people or allies in the institution or even outside of it that are willing to be a listening ear and use their voices to assist me with advocacy. So shout out to Dr. Kim Clark, shout out to Dr. Preston, shout out to my friends in the anti-oppression unit at the City of London. Finding that community, whether it's on campus, around campus, allows there to be more accountability with stronger voices like the intellectuals or the academics or the professionals backing you. And also it drives people that are considering, like, is Western the place to be if my child has a disability? If I want to work there, will I be treated differently if all of a sudden I get a concussion or have some sort of mind fog because I was in a bike accident? One of my professors actually went through that, and we really bonded over that experience because, life becomes a lot different when you suffer an impairment. And, I think some people underestimate voices of people that are just on the ground. During the release of the anti-racism working group report, prior to that, I was constantly calling it out at Western to say, hey, let us know what the report is so we can look at it before the town hall. And like, we'll give you plenty of time. Plenty of time. Comes out 2 days before. And, I had the media asking me, Ashton, what do you think? And like, we just had an interview a few days ago about how I don't have time. I have medical appointments. I have my own health. It was during the pandemic. I didn't have personal care workers to assist me with my daily activities of daily living. I was also like, Black Lives Matter was happening. So I was getting lots of questions about the intersections of racism, ableism, poverty, the healthcare system. I was being overwhelmed. And I think having a voice is a blessing, but sometimes can feel like you're always the go-to person. And I really encourage other people to find their voices or ways that their voices can be supported. So that, I don't know, the sound of one, I don't know if there's an analogy, but, the sound of one clapping hand versus like a whole, crowd of people, but the noise makes a difference. I feel like there's one more thing I want to say about, now I remember the point I want to say about voice, about the acceptable voices. So I also noticed in the institution that people who speak on accessibility and disability, who promote the status quo or that speak nicely about certain things, get more prominence in the institution, get more perks, get more access to power and institutional power, get jobs, get funding, get money. Whereas somebody like me who's going to be like, I can't do my work or be true to the community if I'm going to tell you lies about how accessible Western is. It's really difficult for me to do that work. And I can do it like a complimentary salad, sandwich, not salad. This is what's working. This is what's not working, lots of meat. And this is where I see we can be improvement. But it's really hard when people, especially in the institutions, take it as offense or get defensive. We have lots of things happening on campus about decolonialization, and we have a whole team working on Indigenous issues. We have a whole teams working on LGBT issues and gender issues. We have whole teams working on racism. And often in those conversations, it's like, it's time that we, listen to those with lived experiences and take that feedback and reflect on it, not to immediately shut it down. But there's a lot of shutting down those conversations, a lot of gatekeeping of conversations, and nothing's really made transparent to the community so they can just jump in without having to go through asking for permission. The last thing I want to say about voice is that it tends to get funneled out when we go through certain institutional processes. I can go to my accessibility counselor about something, and it might be a systemic issue. Then she might take it to, or they may take it to their boss, and then it eventually makes it to the EDI office. And by the time it gets there, what I initially started with is fizzled out to like, we just need this one door. And I'm like, it's not about one door. It's about many doors. It's about many issues about wayfinding. It's about how we design our spaces. And getting back to the table of power and access is very hard. So I'm looking at ways of creating my own tables where there are people that do have power, but also are more receptive to listening, and then finding ways we can work together to challenge the status quo and move forward. Sorry, I took up a lot of time there.
No problem. I want to respond to one thing you said in particular. Two things. I'll say two things. One is I've had the exact same experience about, I don't know what you call it, abled fragility. So there was a point, for instance, during the pandemic where there was a communication from upper admin basically saying, if you are immunocompromised, we're sorry, but you should probably drop out. Like, not even, it's like, oh, my heart goes out to you, but you should drop out. Not even like, oh, maybe take a leave of absence, which they could have also said. And I simply pointed out that this was an extremely ableist thing. And the response from the administrator was, I know so-and-so, and they work very hard. And I'm like, I'm sure they do, but that doesn't mean that the statement's not ableist. It's like, well, I was, supported the Sandinistas 50 years ago in Nicaragua. So obviously I'm still left-wing today. I mean, it has nothing to do with anything that they're a hardworking person. And you need to be able to name things if you just need to be able to name things as problematic without people immediately getting defensive, if you're going to actually affect change. And I think that's the way power is maintained too. Like it's not an accident that we have to be concerned about their feelings, but they don't have to be concerned about ours. The other thing I wanted to point out is your point about your squeaky voice, like where voice isn't a metaphor, because that's really the thing I'm messing with in the book a lot, over really 3 chapters of the book. And I think that it's a domain that we haven't really worked out, either politically or philosophically. Voice is really used as a metaphor for agency in all these ways. And yet there's all this discrimination around the sound of voices, around the way voices work and don't work, whether one is in control or a master of one's own voice, a voice as a, somehow it's almost like old, like Christian spiritualists, like the breath of the soul leaking out of the mouth of the person. And the result of that is it's a different sort of axis through which ableism is exercised. And so the term is in such common use, I don't think we're ever gonna, in any time in the near future, move away from voice as a metaphor for agency, because it's so tied to these other things. But I'd say it's of the same kind of issue as using blindness or deafness as a metaphor in an analytical argument, or like in philosophy, I love Georgina Klege's stuff on the hypothetical blind person. I think that it's done with humor and delicacy, but also like it's a sharp line. And so I wonder about that for voices and what it would mean to live in a world where the voice isn't an index to the self. Like I think that that's also an interesting way to imagine an anti-ableist future. So that's when you said, but my voice is squeaky, and because it's funny, I don't hear you that way. I hear you as somebody extremely authoritative, but I might be primed for that. So
I don't know, maybe it's just a personal bias that I have about my own voice. I like the way it sounds to me like this, but just not when it's played back to me.
Well, everybody sounds weird when they hear themselves, right? Like when you hear a recording of yourself, it's like that, but my head is so resonant.
Just 2 things. Again, pointing out our ASL interpreters, thank you for doing a great job. But again, knowing many people who use ASL as their main form of communication, it's harder for them, again, to navigate those systems where it seems like you need a voice. Like if you're going to call up your politician, you don't do it that way. You have to go to their office, or you might have to write them a letter, but maybe you're more fluent and more expressive and more persuasive in ASL. And how do we change our community so that way people that use ASL or other forms of sign language can be more easily included in our activism, but also in our political world? And instead of just thinking about, if somebody asks, then we'll get the ASL interpreter, versus like, maybe if we just have ASL interpreters, people will show up because they'll feel like they're welcome there. I did do a faux pas once when I was organizing the city's accessibility open houses 8 years ago. Our posters had like the ASL symbol on it, and it was just more decorative, but someone showed up and they were enraged because they thought there was going to be ASL interpreters, even though we said, hey, can you let us know if you need an accommodation? And I felt like, this is a citywide event. Of course, we're going to have people who need things like that. So now it's always at the forefront whenever we're doing things very publicly and openly, to make sure that we're bringing in interpreters so that members of the deaf, hard of hearing community or ASL users have access to that. Another thing about voice that I didn't mention, I'm very open about my chronic illness, scleroderma. I've been featured in like commitment to cure videos with the Arthritis Society. My face has been used with the Scleroderma Society with their promotions. I've been featured in London health resources. Like some of their magazines have my face. So I'm very open, but I also realize that being that open, there's a lot of stigmas about what I can actually do. So even when it was Disability Mentoring Day ages ago, I got paired with a big bank in downtown Toronto. And when I just mentioned that I'm immunocompromised and I would prefer to know if somebody that I'm working closely with is sick or not, because I would prefer not to work with them that day and we could find a different day, I got ghosted. And this is with the HR office. So I was just like, this is so weird. It just felt like the very, the HR office often deals with accommodations depending on what organization you're with, but this shouldn't be hard to accommodate or talk about. It's usually just like, nope, we can't have this person here. And I think that's how we end up silencing voices unintentionally when there's people in the community that have these ableist perceptions of someone's ability. And again, like you said, agency.
I think at this moment, we're starting to get some questions in the Q&A forum. So I want to pull out one of those right now. And this is just a reminder to those joining us for the conversation. If you have questions you want to pose to the group, to the speakers, please put them in the Q&A forum or in the chat so we can find them. And this is a question directed at Jonathan coming from Lisa Henderson. So Lisa says, thank you for this conversation, colleagues. Jonathan, can you compare the relationship between disability and impairment to the relationship between minoritizing and universalizing conceptions of queerness? I haven't read Diminished Faculties yet, which this question may reveal. Do these two distinctions do similar things? This may require you defining minoritizing and universalizing. I ask in the spirit of accountability and breadth inclusion without Me Tooism or abled fragility. Thanks for this question, Lisa. Jonathan.
Ooh, well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I know what Lisa means by minoritizing or universalizing notions of queerness. So just so we're clear, is the universalizing notion of queerness like going out and finding queerness in everything and queering things and that kind of approach, whereas the minoritizing version is that queerness should be the reserve of queer people? Is that the difference? Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, okay, this is a problem in disability theory and disability politics, and I'm sure Ashton has stuff to say on this too. Because, okay, so in the academic world, you have like readings that crip things that aren't expressly about disability, but the more challenging part of it is there's an argument that everyone will become impaired or disabled at some point in their lives. And that's an argument you hear, right? That you're just not disabled yet. You're temporarily non-disabled is another phrase I've heard. But, a number of scholars and activists have pushed back against this because, of course, disabled is both an identification and like a bureaucratic or juridical category, right? It's a category bestowed upon you by the state or by institutions, right? And so there's this like Jasbir Puar has this line like, not everybody gets to be disabled, not everybody lives long enough to become disabled, and I think that's also something that has to be kept in mind with the sort of universalizing impulse. Is that, it's part of it is like intersectionality 101. Who are you talking about? There is no universal subject that moves from able to disabled. Doing that in a gendered body, a raced body, an indigenous body, all those things mean different things in different communities, different spaces, different bodies. So I myself am I try to, I don't know, strike a midpoint, I guess. Because I, for instance, do think that there's a lot of common cause around accessibility, for instance, between various disability communities and various communities of elderly people. Like if you think about something like interface design for computers and smartphones and things like that, a lot of the issues are quite related. Like the access needs are quite similar, right? And this is also really important, I think, in the theory of access. I mean, this is something you see in all of the disability and design books and all the histories of universal access that I've read anyway, is that when you develop accessible spaces and technologies, they're useful to lots of people who don't identify as disabled but have similar access needs. So the classic example is the curb cut, which is not just useful for people in wheelchairs, but double basists with wheels and people with their grocery carts and people with strollers and people with roller bar suitcases. Closed captioning is another great example that's like useful in airports and gyms, as well as for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So I think that there's a kind of transversal I think there's kind of a transversal cut you can make between that minoritizing and universalizing, if I can use that metaphor. That's useful. That says that these things matter to more than like just disabled people, without saying everyone is disabled or everyone is impaired in some way. And so we can all be disabled together, because that ignores the real damage that ableism does, in my opinion. What do you think, Ashton?
You said a lot, and I agree I pretty much agree. Because I was thinking about, people don't really think of babies as disabled unless there's something out of the norm. But babies, many of them can't speak, but we don't say that, they have a speech impediment at that time. Many of them don't come out of the womb walking. I don't know if there's ever been a baby doing that. And they aren't able to move independently without assistance, but we don't consider them disabled. So maybe there is a conversation to be had about not everybody is disabled and what it really means to be disabled. But at the same time, like you said, recognizing that many of the things that we're aiming for benefit everybody. So at some stage in life, you were not able to walk and you needed to be carried around or pushed around. At some stage in life, somebody had to communicate with you in a different way. At some stage in life, somebody had to feed you, change your diaper, give you a bath, dress you, all those other things. And whether you end up with a disability or chronic illness or something along the way in life, I think we all have to remember, as humans, we are not independent. We're only independent through our means of being interdependent. So recognizing that we all rely on each other to do things, whether it's produce food, clothing, build buildings, develop technology, we need to realize that we need to create an environment where everybody is capable of doing something to support the overall community and to support themselves and access the supports they need. So universal design helps with that. And I don't know, sometimes getting caught up in language, we forget about that. At the end of the day, we just need a world that everybody can use, not this model idea of humanness that is two-footed and can lift things and can walk and all that jazz.
And we have one more question. We're almost at 1 o'clock, so we might go a little bit over time, but we do have one more question that we want to ask. From Jeff Preston, who in the Q&A says there are a bunch of policy and legislative fights happening in the Canadian disability activism, trademarked, world right now, whether it's fighting MAID or destructive airlines. What role do these panelists feel work in the cultural industries can help or harm these fights? Is it the legislative battleground where we should actually be fighting? Or is the ideological field where we should be focusing instead? And that's to either of you, so whoever wants to.
I feel like it's I like to fight on all grounds. But again, I can't do that alone. I find with people, like, again, using social media to change minds and get people's attention to issues so that they can actually bring that to their politicians. And then also, like, I'm so frustrated with the implementation of, like, well, just the government saying something about the post-secondary education standards for the AODA. It's a lot of like, when is it going to come out? When are we going to start implementing it? When is there going to be enforcement? And it depends on, our governments, but also I think given a lot of the activism that's been happening since, I think during the pandemic and since the pandemic, there is a lot more push for more accessible or inclusive policies in post-secondary education and beyond. So if more people are speaking up about it and getting frustrated about it, it kind of pushes our government to move. But because I've seen institutions pivot, like Western, when the issue about a word that was not appropriate to be used in a certain in a classroom setting was said, and then all of a sudden, huge momentum to bring committees together, people together to create an action planning, bring it out. So how do we build that momentum? It's tough. There's just so much going on. And I know that Maya Zinn, who's from Access, the creator of the Access Now app, does amazing work about using meeting with politicians and legislative authorities, but also doing the groundwork and bringing people up. But again, it's a lot of community building and pushing. And academics have a role to play, because I feel like, again, since in our society, the intellectuals tend to have more credibility or seem to be taken in more by institutions. They're the link between the community and our politicians to get things done. And yeah, I hope that helps, because it's a tough one. Sometimes I really don't know, because when it comes to legislation, things move very slowly. And even with the human rights tribunals, I've gone through those processes many times. Since the pandemic, it's been even slower than before. And students trying to get, justice in their respective cases, those things have been drawn out, harm has been drawn out. And usually once the case is settled decided, at least it creates a precedent and more law to push for policy development. But it's so slow, and our, legal accountability institutions like the Human Rights Legal Support Center, or other organizations that do legal work for people with disabilities, like Arch Disability Law Firm, the resources to keep up and do that work, the government's not providing it. And I remember even speaking with somebody from the Human Rights Legal Support Center about, I need to advocate to politicians to change things. And I'm like, I have a lot on my plate right now. Like, it's a lot to be told you need to do all this other stuff. And yeah, I think fighting on all ends, but that requires getting the community on board.
I'll be brief this time. I agree with all of that. Very well said. And I just want to amplify one thing in particular you said, which is, I think it's a bit of a stacked deck, in the sense that politicians and bureaucrats and other sort of institutionalized people are paid to sit in meetings and do all this policy work. And it's something that activists are asked to do for free, on top of everything else they're doing in their lives. And so it's already, like, it's not just the additive thing that's a problem. I think it's a structural problem in terms of, and it's a way that makes it harder to make change, right? Because there's all these professionals who are paid to do things in a certain way, whereas you're basically we are doing it on our volunteer time. That's all I'll say, because I know we're over time here, and I saw Norma's question too, which I'd love to talk about, but I don't know if we'll have time.
I know we're over time, but I want to mention, like, jumping on John's point about activists not being paid. Going into the access fatigue conversation, I know Dr. Kim Clark did lots of research and has presented that across Canada and shared it with Western. It's exhausting. Like, I don't think people understand that I'm not just advocating for accessibility on campus, I'm also advocating for accessibility in public housing, because that's where I live. I'm advocating for accessibility when contacting the police, all the other stuff. They say they're AODA compliant, but I can point out things on their website. It says, like, I do a lot in terms of advocating for better transportation, but it's a lot behind the scenes. And it's hard because I am so tired. I'm living below the poverty line. I'm trying to navigate a very difficult medical system where ableism and racism are still very present. And, like, I tend to be the person that likes to not challenge my doctors, but ask questions. And they get frustrated, because I do read medical journals about my different conditions. The one that is most pressing is about my high risk of esophageal cancer and how to avoid that, and not getting clear answers and having to keep pushing. It's exhausting, and it's a lot of unpaid work. And I do a lot of subsidized work for Western when I'm helping students, or even staff members, navigate the system and connecting them with people higher up to address a lot of concerns, whether it's employment and or education related.
Thanks so much for that, Ashton. And I mean, I hate to be the one to break in, but I am conscious of the time. So I would like to wrap things up. But I mean, we haven't even got a chance to talk about fatigue yet. We wanted to ask about care work and self-organizing on campus. And I think this just proves that it's been a really rich conversation today. And as always, this is kind of more ideas and threads that we can pick up in the next iteration of this series. So I really would like to sincerely thank our speakers, Ashton, Jonathan. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your work. It's been absolutely a privilege to learn from you. Thank you to our audience for being here. And for those of you, I see we've had some more questions in the chat. We also had a question in the Q&A from Norma. This is certainly something we want to follow up on. Heather's put her email out there. So please get in touch. We'd love to have more conversations informally here at FIMS, as well as tie this into our bigger series, these conversations on access. So thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you at the next event. And stay tuned for details about that. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
And Matt, I'll ask you to close our recording if you don't mind. And I would also like to thank so much, Sarah, Rachel, for your interpretation today. It's really, thank you. It's been great to have you with us.
Thank you. Yeah.
I kind of want to do a part 2 because there's so much more I wish you could have done.